About the Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is a 1983 American epic space opera discuss film directed by Richard Marquand. The screenplay by Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas was from a story by Lucas, who was also the executive producer. It was the third film released in the Star Wars saga and the first film to use THX technology. The film is set 1 year after The Empire Strikes Back and was produced by Howard Kazanjian for Lucasfilm Limited. The film stars Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Billy D. Williams, Anthony Daniels, David Prowse, Kenny Baker, Peter Mayhew, and Frank Oz. The evil Galactic Empire, under the direction of the ruthless Emperor, is constructing a second Death Star in order to crush the Rebel Alliance once and for all. Since Emperor Palpatine plans to personally oversee the final stages of its construction, the Rebel fleet launches a full-scale attack on the Death Star in order to prevent its completion and kill Palpatine, effectively bringing an end to the Empire's hold over the galaxy. Meanwhile, Luke Skywalker, a Jedi apprentice, struggles to bring Darth Vader, whom he finds out is actually his father Anakin and a fallen Jedi, back from the dark side of the Force. David Lynch and David Cronenberg were considered to direct the project before Marquand signed on as director. The production team relied on Lucas storyboards during pre-production. While writing the shooting script, Lucas, Kasdan, Marquand, and producer Howard Kazanjian spent 2 weeks in conference discussing ideas to construct it. Kazanjian's schedule pushed shooting to begin a few weeks early to allow Industrial Light and Magic more time to work on the film's effects in post-production. Filming took place in England, California, and Arizona from January to March 1982. Strict secrecy surrounded the production and the film used the working title Blue Harvest to prevent price gouging. The film was released in theaters on May 25, 1983, receiving mostly positive reviews. The film grossed over $572 million worldwide. Several home video and theatrical releases and revisions to the film followed over the next 20 years. Star Wars continued with Episode 1, The Phantom Menace as part of the film series prequel trilogy. A sequel, Star Wars, The Force Awakens, was released on December 18, 2015. Plot: Luke Skywalker initiates a plan to rescue Han Solo from the crime lord Jabba the Hutt with the help of Princess Leia, Lando Calrissian, Chewbacca, C-3PO, and R2-D2. Leia infiltrates Jabba's palace on Tatooine disguised as a bounty hunter with Chewbacca as her prisoner. Lando is already there disguised as a guard. Leia releases Han from his carbonite prison, but she is captured and enslaved. Luke arrives soon afterward, but after a tense standoff, he is captured. After Luke survives his battle with Jabba's rancor, Jabba sentences him and Han to death by feeding them to the pit monster Sarlacc. They are taken to the Great Pit of Carkoon, Sarlacc's nesting ground, where Luke frees himself with R2-D2's help and battles Jabba's guards. During the chaos, Boba Fett attempts to attack Luke, but Han inadvertently knocks him into the Sarlacc pit. Meanwhile, Leia strangles Jabba, and Luke destroys Jabba's sail barge as the group escapes. While the others rendezvous with the Rebel Alliance, Luke returns to Dagobah where he finds that Yoda is dying. Before he dies, Yoda confirms that Darth Vader, once known as Anakin Skywalker, is Luke's father, and there is another Skywalker. The ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi confirms that this other Skywalker is Luke's twin sister, Leia. After Luke realizes this truth, Obi-Wan tells Luke that he must fight Vader again to defeat the Empire. Obi-Wan also alerts Luke to keep his emotions and feelings in check, as they do him credit, but could lead him to serve the Emperor. The Rebel Alliance learns that the Empire has been constructing a new Death Star under the supervision of the Emperor himself. As the station is protected by an energy shield, Han leads a strike team to destroy the shield generator on the forest moon of Endor. Doing so would allow a squadron of starfighters to destroy the Death Star. The strike team, accompanied by Luke and Leia, travels to Endor in a stolen Imperial shuttle. On Endor, Luke and his companions encounter a tribe of Wokes and, after an initial conflict, gain their trust. Later, Luke tells Leia that she is his sister, Vader is their father, and that he must go and confront him. Surrendering to Imperial troops, Luke is brought to Vader. Luke tries to convince Vader to turn from the dark side of the Force, but fails. Vader takes Luke to the Death Star to meet the Emperor, who is intent on turning him to the dark side. The Emperor reveals that the Death Star is actually fully operational and the Rebel fleet will fall into a trap. On Endor, Han's strike team is captured by Imperial forces, but a surprise counterattack by the Wokes allows the rebels to battle the Imperials. Meanwhile, Lando, piloting the Millennium Falcon, leads the Rebel fleet to the Death Star, only to find that the station's shield is still active and the Imperial fleet is waiting for them. The Emperor tempts Luke to give in to his anger and join the dark side of the Force, and Luke engages Vader in a lightsaber duel. Vader senses that Luke has a sister, and threatens to turn her to the dark side. Enraged, Luke attacks Vader and severs his father's prosthetic right hand. The Emperor entreats Luke to kill Vader and take his place, but Luke refuses, declaring himself a Jedi as his father had been. On Endor, the strike team defeats the Imperial forces and destroys the shield generator, allowing the Rebel fleet to launch their assault on the Death Star. At the same time, a furious Emperor tortures Luke with Force lightning. Unwilling to let his son die, Vader kills the Emperor but is mortally wounded in the process. He asks Luke to remove his mask, and after a brief talk, he dies peacefully. As the battle between the Imperial and Alliance fleets continues, Lando leads a group of rebel ships into the Death Star's core and destroys the main reactor. As Luke escapes on a shuttle with his father's body, the Falcon flies out of the Death Star as the station explodes. On Endor, Leia reveals to Han that Luke is her brother, and they kiss. Luke returns to Endor and cremates his father's body on a funeral pyre. As the rebels celebrate their victory over the Empire, Luke smiles as he sees the ghosts of Obi-Wan, Yoda, and the redeemed Anakin watching over them. Cast: Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker, one of the last living Jedi and an X-Wing fighter pilot. Harrison Ford as Han Solo, a Rogan smuggler. Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia Organa, the former princess of the destroyed planet Alderaan and Luke's twin sister. Billy D. Williams as Lando Calrissian, the former Baron Administrator of Cloud City and one of Han's companions. Anthony Daniels as C-3PO, Luke's humanoid protocol droid. Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca, a loyal Wookiee and Han's longtime companion. Sebastian Shaw as Anakin Skywalker, Luke's father. He was partly replaced by Hayden Christensen in the 2004 DVD release. Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor, the ruler of the Galactic Empire and Vader's master. Frank Oz as Yoda, Luke's self-exiled Jedi Master living in Dagobah. David Prowse as Darth Vader, a Dark Warrior, commander of the Galactic Empire and Luke's father. James Earl Jones provides the voice of Darth Vader. Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi, Luke's deceased Jedi Master. Kenny Baker and Dennis Lawson reprise their roles as R2-D2 and Wedge Antilles from Star Wars, and Kenneth Colley and Jeremy Bulloch reprise their roles as Admiral Piet and Boba Fett from The Empire Strikes Back. Michael Pennington portrays Moff Jerjerrod, the commander of the second Death Star. Warwick Davis appears as Wicket W. Warwick, and Waktu leads Leia and eventually her friends to the Wok tribe. Baker was originally cast as Wicket, but was replaced by Davis after falling ill with food poisoning on the morning of the shoot. Davis had no previous acting experience and was cast only after his grandmother had discovered an open call for dwarfs for the new Star Wars film. Carolyn Blackiston portrays Mon Mothma, a co-founder and leader of the Rebel Alliance. David Barclay was the chief puppeteer for Jabba the Hutt and Larry Ward provided his uncredited voice. To portray the numerous alien species featured in the film, a multitude of puppeteers, voice actors, and stunt performers were employed. They include Timothy Imrose as Admiral Akbar, Cy Snoodles and Salacious Scrum, Mike Quinn as Neen Nanb, a baby Wok, and Wal Kavissit, Simon Williamson as Max Rebo, Gamorrean guard and Amon Calamari. He also assisted in operating Neen Nanb, Deep Roy as Droopy McCool, Ailsa Burke as a Miniman, Paul Springer as Reese, Hugh Spite as a Gamorrean guard, Elam and Amon Calamari, Gerald Holm as Tusk and Amon Calamari officer, Phil Herbert as Hermiodel, Tick and Talk, Tim Dry and Sean Gralford, as Wyford and Yak Face, and Phil Tippett as the Ranker. Production. 1-of-1 development. As with the previous film, Lucas personally financed Return of the Jedi. Lucas approached David Lynch, who had been nominated for the Academy Award for Best Director for The Elephant Man in 1980, to helm Return of the Jedi, but Lynch declined in order to direct Dune. David Cronenberg was also offered the chance to direct the film, but he declined the offer to make Videodrome and The Dead Zone. Lucas eventually chose Richard Marquand. Lucas may have directed some of the second unit work personally as the shooting threatened to go over schedule. This is a function Lucas had willingly performed on previous occasions when he had only officially been producing a film, for example More American Graffiti, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Lucas did operate a B camera on the set a few times. Lucas himself has admitted to being on the set frequently due to Marquand's relative inexperience with special effects. Lucas praised Marquand as a very nice person who worked well with actors. Marquand did note that Lucas kept a conspicuous presence on set, joking, "It is rather like trying to direct King Lear with Shakespeare in the next room." The screenplay was written by Lawrence Kasdan and Lucas, with uncredited contributions by David Peoples and Marquand, based on Lucas' story. Kasdan claims he told Lucas that Return of the Jedi was a weak title, and Lucas later decided to name the film Revenge of the Jedi. The screenplay itself was not finished until rather late in pre-production, well after a production schedule and budget had been created by Kazanjian and Marquand had been hired, which was unusual for a film. Instead, the production team relied on Lucas' story and rough draft in order to commence work with the art department. When it came time to formally write a shooting script, Lucas, Kasdan, Marquand and Kazanjian spent 2 weeks in conference discussing ideas. Kasdan used tape transcripts of these meetings to then construct the script. The issue of whether Harrison Ford would return for the final film arose during pre-production. Unlike the other stars of the first film, Ford had not contracted to do 2 sequels, and Raiders of the Lost Ark had made him an even bigger star. Ford suggested that Han Solo be killed through self-sacrifice. Kasdan concurred, saying it should happen near the beginning of the film to instill doubt as to whether the others would survive, but Lucas was vehemently against it and rejected the concept. Gary Kurtz, who produced Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back but was replaced as producer for Return of the Jedi, said in 2010 that the ongoing success with Star Wars merchandise and toys led George Lucas to reject the idea of killing off Han Solo in the middle part of the film during a raid on an Imperial base. Luke Skywalker was also to have walked off alone and exhausted like the hero in a spaghetti western, but, according to Kurtz, Lucas opted for a happier ending to encourage higher merchandise sales. Yoda was originally not meant to appear in the film, but Marquand strongly felt that returning to Dagobah was essential to resolve the dilemma raised by the previous film. The inclusion led Lucas to insert a scene in which Yoda confirms that Darth Vader is Luke's father because, After a discussion with a children's psychologist, he did not want younger moviegoers to dismiss Vader's claim as a lie. Many ideas from the original script were left out or changed. For instance, the Wokes were going to be Wookiees, the Millennium Falcon would be used in the arrival at the forest moon of Endor, and Obi-Wan Kenobi would return to life from his spectral existence in the Force. 1 of 2 filming. Filming began on January 11, 1982 and lasted through May 20, 1982, a schedule 6 weeks shorter than The Empire Strikes Back. Kazanjian's schedule pushed shooting as early as possible in order to give Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, as much time as possible to work on effects, and left some crew members dubious of their ability to be fully prepared for the shoot. Working on a budget of $32.5 million, Lucas was determined to avoid going over budget as had happened with The Empire Strikes Back. Producer Howard Kazanjian estimated that using ILM, owned wholly by Lucasfilm, for special effects saved the production approximately $18 million. However, the fact that Lucasfilm was a non-union company made acquiring shooting locations more difficult and more expensive, even though Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back had been big hits. The project was given the working title Blue Harvest with a tagline of horror beyond imagination. This disguised what the production crew was really filming from fans and the press, and also prevented price gouging by service providers. The first stage of production started with 78 days at Elstree Studios in England, where the film occupied all 9 stages. The shoot commenced with a scene later deleted from the finished film where the heroes get caught in a sandstorm as they leave Tatooine. This was the only major sequence cut from the film during editing. While attempting to film Luke Skywalker's battle with the Rancor Beast, Lucas insisted on trying to create the scene in the same style as Toho's Godzilla films by using a stunt performer inside a suit. The production team made several attempts, but were unable to create an adequate result. Lucas eventually relented and decided to film the Rancor as a high-speed puppet. In April, the crew moved to the Yuma Desert in Arizona for 2 weeks of Tatooine exteriors. Production then moved to the redwood forests of Northern California near Crescent City where 2 weeks were spent shooting the Endor Forest exteriors, and then concluded at ILM in San Rafael, California for about 10 days of blue screen shots. 1 of 2 skeletal post-production units shooting background matte plates spent a day in Death Valley. The other was a special Steadicam unit shooting forest backgrounds from June 15 to 17, 1982 for the speeder chase near the middle of the film. Steadicam inventor Garrett Brown personally operated these shots as he walked through a disguised path inside the forest shooting at less than 1 frame per second. By walking at about 5 miles per hour, 8 kilometers per hour, and projecting the footage at 24 frames, the motion scene in the film appeared as if it were moving at around 120 miles per hour, 190 kilometers per hour. 1 of 3 music. John Williams composed and conducted the film's musical score with performances by the London Symphony Orchestra. Orchestration credits also include Thomas Newman. The initial release of the film's soundtrack was on the RSO Records label in the United States. Sony Classical Records acquired the rights to the classic trilogy scores in 2004 after gaining the rights to release the second trilogy soundtracks, The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. In the same year, Sony Classical repressed the 1997 RCA Victor release of Return of the Jedi along with the other 2 films in the trilogy. The set was released with the new artwork mirroring the first DVD release of the film. Despite the Sony digital remastering, which minimally improved the sound heard only on high-end stereos, this 2004 release is essentially the same as the 1997 RCA Victor release. 1 of 4 post-production. Meanwhile, special effects work at ILM quickly stretched the company to its operational limits. While the R&D work and experience gained from the previous two films in the trilogy allowed for increased efficiency, this was offset by the desire to have the closing film raise the bar set by each of these films. A compounding factor was the intention of several departments of ILM to either take on other film work or decrease staff during slow cycles. Instead, as soon as production began, the entire company found it necessary to remain running 20 hours a day on 6-day weeks in order to meet their goals by April 1, 1983. Of about 900 special effects shots, all VistaVision optical effects remained in-house, since ILM was the only company capable of using the format, while about 404 perf opticals were subcontracted to outside effects houses. Progress on the opticals was severely retarded for a time due to ILM rejecting about 100,000 feet, 30,000 meters, of film when the film perforations failed image registration and steadiness tests. Release. Return of the Jedi's theatrical release took place on May 25, 1983. It was originally slated to be May 27, but was subsequently changed to coincide with the date of the 1977 release of the original Star Wars film. With a massive worldwide marketing campaign, illustrator Tim Reamer created the image for the movie poster and other advertising. At the time of its release, the film was advertised on posters and merchandise as simply Star Wars: Return of the Jedi, despite its on-screen Episode 6 distinction. The original film was later re-released to theaters in 1985. In 1997, for the 20th anniversary of the release of Star Wars, retitled Episode 4, A New Hope, Lucas released the Star Wars Trilogy, Special Edition. Along with the two other films in the original trilogy, Return of the Jedi was re-released on March 14, 1997 with a number of changes and additions, which included the insertion of several alien band members in Jabba's throne room, the modification of the Sarlacc to include a beak, the replacement of music at the closing scene, and a montage of different alien worlds celebrating the fall of the Empire. According to Lucas, Return of the Jedi required fewer changes than the previous two films because it is more emotionally driven than the others. One title change. The original teaser trailer for the film carried the name Revenge of the Jedi. In December 1982, Lucas decided that revenge was not appropriate as Jedi should not seek revenge and return to his original title. By that time thousands of revenge teaser posters, with artwork by Drew Struzan, had been printed and distributed. Lucasfilm stopped the shipping of the posters and sold the remaining stock of 6,800 posters to Star Wars fan club members for $9.50. Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, released in 2005 as part of the prequel trilogy, later alluded to the dismissed title Revenge of the Jedi. One of two home media. The original theatrical version of Return of the Jedi was released on VHS and Laserdisc several times between 1986 and 1995, followed by releases of the special edition in the same formats between 1997 and 2000. Some of these releases contained featurettes, some were individual releases of just this film, while others were boxed sets of all three original films. On September 21, 2004, the special editions of all three original films were released in a boxed set on DVD. It was digitally restored and remastered, with additional changes made by George Lucas. The DVD also featured English subtitles, Dolby Digital 5.1x surround sound, and commentaries by George Lucas, Ben Burtt, Dennis Muren, and Carrie Fisher. The bonus disc included documentaries including Empire of Dreams, the story of the Star Wars trilogy, and several featurettes including the characters of Star Wars, the birth of the lightsaber, and the legacy of Star Wars. Also included were teasers, trailers, TV spots, still galleries, and a demo for Star Wars Battlefront. with the release of Star Wars Episode III, Revenge of the Sith, which depicts how and why Anakin Skywalker turned to the dark side of the Force. Lucas once again altered Return of the Jedi to bolster the relationship between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. The original and 1997 special edition versions of Return of the Jedi featured British theatre actor Sebastian Shaw playing both the dying Anakin Skywalker and his ghost. In the 2004 DVD, Shaw's portrayal of Anakin's ghost is replaced by Hayden Christensen, who portrayed Anakin in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. All three films in the original unaltered Star Wars trilogy were later released, individually, on DVD on September 12, 2006. These versions were originally slated to only be available until December 31, 2006, although they remained in print until May 2011 and were packaged with the 2004 versions again in a new box set on November 4, 2008. Although the 2004 versions in these sets each feature an audio commentary, no other extra special features were included to commemorate the original cuts. A Blu-ray disc version of the Star Wars saga was announced for release in 2011 during Star Wars Celebration V. Several deleted scenes from Return of the Jedi were included for the Blu-ray version, including a sandstorm sequence following the battle at the Sarlacc pit, a scene featuring Moff Jerjerrod and Death Star officers during the Battle of Endor, and a scene where Darth Vader communicates with Luke via the Force as Skywalker is assembling his new lightsaber before he infiltrates Jabba's palace. On January 6, 2011, 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment announced the Blu-ray release for September 2011 in 3 different editions, and the cover art was unveiled in May. 1 of 3 digital release. On April 7, 2015, the Walt Disney Studios, 20th Century Fox, and Lucasfilm jointly announced the digital releases of the 6 released Star Wars films. As Lucasfilm had retained digital distribution rights to all episodes sans 4, Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment released Return of the Jedi for digital download on April 10, 2015. Reception. Return of the Jedi grossed $572 million worldwide. The review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes has a 80% approval rating with an average score of 7.2 based on 83 reviews from critics. On Metacritic, the film received a score of 52/100 based on 14 reviews from mainstream critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Contemporary critics were largely positive. In 1983, film critic Roger Ebert gave the film 4 stars out of 4, and James Kendrick of Q Network Film Desk described Return of the Jedi as a magnificent experience. The film was also featured on the May 23, 1983 Time magazine cover issue, where it was labeled Star Wars 3, where the reviewer Gerald Clark said that while it was not as exciting as the first Star Wars film, it was better and more satisfying than The Empire Strikes Back, now considered by many as the best of the original trilogy. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called it by far the dimmest adventure of the lot. RealViews.net's James Berardinelli wrote about the 1997 special edition re-release that although it was great fun rewatching Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back again on the big screen, Return of the Jedi doesn't generate the same sense of enjoyment. And, while Lucas worked diligently to reinvigorate each entry into the trilogy, Jedi needs more than the patches of improved sound, cleaned up visuals, and a few new scenes. Still, despite the flaws, this is still Star Wars, and, as such, represents a couple of lightly entertaining hours spent with characters we have gotten to know and love over the years. Return of the Jedi is easily the weakest of the series, but its position as the conclusion makes it a must-see for anyone who has enjoyed its predecessor. While the action set pieces, particularly the Sarlacc battle sequence, the speeder bike chase on the Endor moon, the space battle between Rebel and Imperial pilots, and Luke Skywalker's duel against Darth Vader are well regarded. The ground battle between the Wokes and Imperial stormtroopers remains a bone of contention. Fans are also divided on the likelihood of Wokes being an extremely primitive race of small creatures armed with sticks and rocks, defeating an armed ground force comprising the Empire's best troops. Lucas has defended the scenario, saying that the Wokes' purpose was to distract the Imperial troops and that the Wokes did not really win. His inspiration for the Wokes' victory came from the Vietnam War, where the indigenous Viet Cong forces prevailed against the technologically superior United States. One at the 56th Academy Awards in 1984, Richard Edlund, Dennis Muren, Ken Ralston, and Phil Tippett received the Special Achievement Award for Visual Effects. Norman Reynolds, Fred Hole, James L. Shop, and Michael Ford were nominated for Best Art Direction, Set Decoration. Ben Burtt received a nomination for Best Sound Effects Editing. John Williams received the nomination for Best Music, Original Score. Burtt, Gary Summers, Randy Tom and Tony Dahl all received the nominations for Best Sound. At the 1984 BAFTA Awards, Edlund, Muren, Ralston, and Kit West won for Best Special Visual Effects. Tippett and Stuart Freeborn were also nominated for Best Makeup. Reynolds received a nomination for Best Production Design, Art Direction. Burtt, Dahl, and Summers also received nominations for Best Sound. Williams was also nominated Best Album of Original Score written for a motion picture or television special. The film also won for Best Dramatic Presentation, the Older Award for Science Fiction and Fantasy in Film, at the 1984 Hugo Awards. Marketing. One novelization. The novelization of Return of the Jedi was written by James Caan and was released on May 12, 1983, 13 days before the film's release. One of two radio drama. A radio drama adaptation of the film was written by Brian Daley with additional material contributed by John Whitman and was produced for and broadcast on National Public Radio in 1996. It was based on characters and situations created by George Lucas and on the screenplay by Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas. The first two Star Wars films were similarly adapted for National Public Radio in the early 1980s. But it was not until 1996 that a radio version of Return of the Jedi was heard. Anthony Daniels returned as C-3PO, but Mark Hamill and Billy D. Williams did not reprise their roles as they had for the first two radio dramas. They were replaced by newcomer Joshua Farden as Luke Skywalker and character actor Ari Gross as Lando Calrissian. John Lithgow voiced Yoda, whose voice actor in the films has always been Frank Oz. Bernard Behrens returned as Obi-Wan Kenobi and Brock Peters reprised his role as Darth Vader. Veteran character actor Ed Begley Jr. played Boba Fett. Edward Asner also guest-starred speaking only in grunts as the voice of Jabba the Hutt. The radio drama had a running time of 3 hours. Principal production of the show was completed on February 11, 1996. Only hours after celebrating its completion with the cast and crew of the show, Daley died of pancreatic cancer. The show is dedicated to his memory. The cast and crew recorded a get well message for Daley, but the author never got the chance to hear it. The message is included as part of the Star Wars Trilogy Collector's Edition box set. One of three comic book adaptation. Marvel Comics published a comic book adaptation of the film by writer Archie Goodwin and artists Al Williamson, Carlos Garson, Tom Palmer, and Ron Frenz. The adaptation appeared in Marvel Super Special No. 27 and as a 4-issue limited series. It was later reprinted in a mass-market paperback. One of 4 book and record set. Lucasfilm adapted the story for a children's book and record set. Released in 1983, the 24-page Star Wars, Return of the Jedi read-along book was accompanied by a 331 thirds of a revolution per minute 7-inch, 18 centimeters, gramophone record. Each page of the book contained a cropped frame from the film with an abridged and condensed version of the story. The record was produced by Buena Vista Records. The end.